The moment Susanna Barrett saw the banker's carriage rolling up the dusty path toward her family home, she knew her worst nightmare had finally arrived in the flesh. She stood on the porch of the modest ranch house, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron, her heart hammering against her ribs as the black carriage came to a halt. It was August 1876, and the Wyoming summer heat pressed down on the small ranch just outside Kelton like a heavy blanket. The town itself sat nestled in the southern part of the Wyoming Territory, a place where hope and hardship walked hand in hand through streets lined with false-fronted buildings, and the dreams of people trying to carve out something of their own. Susanna was 22 years old, and in the 3 months since her father had died from pneumonia, she had watched everything he had built begin to crumble like sand through her fingers. The cattle had gotten sick, half the herd lost to some illness she couldn't afford to have diagnosed. The hands her father had employed drifted away when she could no longer pay their wages. Her younger brother Daniel, only 16, did what he could, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The banker who emerged from the carriage was a thin man named Horace Pemberton, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile decades ago. He carried a leather satchel and wore a suit far too fine for the dusty reality of ranch life. "Miss Barrett," he said, not bothering with pleasantries beyond the bare minimum, "I trust you received my letters." "I received them," Susanna said, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I told you I need more time." Time, I am afraid, is a luxury neither of us can afford any longer. Pemberton opened his satchel and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "Your father took out a substantial loan 3 years ago to purchase additional land and expand the herd. The terms were clear. Payment was due quarterly, and you are now 4 payments in arrears. That is over a year of missed payments, Miss Barrett." "My father died," Susanna said, heat rising in her cheeks. "Surely the bank can show some compassion given the circumstances." "The bank is not in the business of compassion. We are in the business of lending money and collecting what is owed." Pemberton's eyes were cold behind those spectacles. "I have been more than patient, but my superiors in Cheyenne have made it clear that this matter must be resolved. You have until the end of the month to vacate the premises." "End of the month?" Susanna's voice rose. "That's 2 weeks. I am aware of the timeline. The foreclosure papers have already been filed. The property will be auctioned to recover the bank's losses." He tucked the papers back into his satchel. "I suggest you begin making arrangements." "This is my home," Susanna said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts to remain composed. "My father built this place with his own hands. My mother is buried on that hill. My brother has nowhere else to go." "That is most unfortunate," Pemberton said, and his tone suggested he found it anything but. "However, it does not change the facts. Good day, Miss Barrett." He climbed back into his carriage and was gone, leaving only dust and despair in his wake. Susanna stood on that porch for a long time after he left, staring out at the land her father had loved so much. The house wasn't large, just 4 rooms, but her father had built it board by board when he first claimed this land. The barn leaned slightly to the left now, in need of repairs she couldn't afford. The corrals held the last dozen cattle they owned, worth perhaps enough to buy food for a few months, but nowhere near enough to satisfy the debt her father had left behind. She didn't cry. There wasn't time for tears. Instead, she went inside to find her brother and figure out where on earth they would go. 3 days later, Susanna found herself in Kelton proper, walking down the main street with its handful of stores. 2 saloons, a general store, a church, and the bank that held the note on her family's ranch. The town wasn't much to look at, but it had been the center of her world for as long as she could remember. She had come with a desperate plan forming in her mind, though she knew it was likely futile. She would beg. She would plead. She would offer to work off the debt somehow, though she had no idea how that would even be possible. She would do whatever it took to save her home. The bank was a sturdy brick building, one of the few in town built to last rather than thrown up quickly like so many of the wooden structures around it. Susanna straightened her shoulders, smoothed down her best dress, the dark blue one she wore to church, and walked inside. The interior was cool and dim after the bright sunlight outside. A young clerk sat at a desk shuffling papers. He looked up when she entered, recognition flickering across his face. "Miss Barrett," he said, his tone sympathetic. Everyone in town knew about her situation by now. Bad news traveled faster than a prairie fire. "What can I do for you?" "I need to speak with Mr. Pemberton," she said. "I'm afraid he's in a meeting at the moment. Perhaps I could help you with something." "I need to speak with him about my father's loan, about the foreclosure." The clerk's expression grew uncomfortable. "Miss Barrett, I don't think there's anything that can be done at this point. The decision has been made." "Please," Susanna said, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to hide it. "I just need 5 minutes of his time." The clerk hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Wait here. I'll see if he can see you." He disappeared through a door at the back of the bank. Susanna waited, her hands clutched together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She tried to plan what she would say, how she would make Pemberton understand that this wasn't just business. This was her life, her brother's future, her family's legacy. The clerk returned and gestured her back. "He'll give you a few minutes." Susanna followed him through the door and into a small office. Pemberton sat behind a large desk that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. He didn't stand when she entered, didn't offer her a seat. "Miss Barrett, I have already explained the situation. There is nothing more to discuss." "Please, Mr. Pemberton, I'm begging you. Give me 6 months. I can sell the remaining cattle, I can take in laundry, I can do whatever it takes. I just need time." 6 months. Pemberton actually laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Miss Barrett, you owe the bank $3,000. That is more money than you will see in a lifetime of taking in laundry. The matter is closed." "My father was a good man who always paid his debts," Susanna said, her voice rising despite her best intentions to remain calm. "He built something real out here. Doesn't that count for anything? What counts is the money he borrowed and failed to repay. Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual business to attend to." "You are a heartless man," Susanna said, the words bursting out before she could stop them. "I am a practical man," Pemberton replied, unmoved. "And you are wasting both our time. Good day." Susanna found herself back on the street moments later, dismissed and defeated. She stood there in the sunlight, blinking back tears of frustration and rage and helplessness. People passed by on the wooden sidewalks, some offering sympathetic glances, others looking away as if poverty might be contagious. She was about to head back to where she had left her horse when she heard a commotion from down the street. A group of men had gathered near the general store, their attention focused on something or someone. Curious despite her misery, Susanna drifted closer. At the center of the group stood a man unlike any she had seen in Kelton before. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His arms, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his worn shirt, were thick with muscle, corded and strong from years of hard labor. His hair was dark and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but even through it, she could see the strong line of his jaw. He looked like he had been carved from the mountains themselves, all hard edges and raw strength. He was selling furs. The pelts spread out on the ground before him were of remarkable quality, thick and lustrous. Bear, wolf, beaver, marten, all the animals that made their homes in the high country. The men examining the furs were making offers, but the mountain man seemed in no hurry to accept any of them. 300 for the lot, one merchant said. The bear hide alone is worth 200, the mountain man replied. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, as if he didn't speak often. I'll take 800 for everything. That's robbery, then don't buy them. The mountain man began gathering up his furs with an easy indifference that suggested he didn't much care whether he made a sale or not. Wait, the merchant said hurriedly. 600, that's my final offer. The mountain man paused, considering. Then he nodded once. Cash. As the transaction concluded, Susanna found herself staring. There was something compelling about this stranger, something that drew the eye and held it. He moved with a quiet confidence, an economy of motion that suggested strength held in careful check. When he straightened after collecting his money, his gaze swept across the crowd and landed on her. For a moment their eyes met. His were a startling gray, like storm clouds, and in them she saw something she couldn't quite name. Wisdom, maybe. Wariness. A depth that suggested he had seen things most men in town could only imagine. Then someone else was speaking to him, asking about where he trapped, and the moment passed. Susanna shook herself and turned away, heading back toward her horse. She had her own problems to worry about. The mysterious mountain man was none of her concern. But as she rode back toward the ranch, she found herself thinking about those gray eyes and wondering what it would be like to be as free as a man who lived in the mountains, beholden to no one. The next few days passed in a blur of grim preparation. Susanna and Daniel began packing what few belongings they could take with them, trying to decide what was essential and what would have to be left behind. Every item they touched carried memories. Her mother's china plates, painted with delicate blue flowers. Her father's watch, which had stopped working 2 years ago but which he had carried every day nonetheless. The quilt her grandmother had made, each square a different pattern. Where will we go? Daniel asked on the 4th night, his young face drawn with worry. He was tall for 16, already showing signs of the man he would become, but there was still so much boy left in him. He looked at Susanna like she had all the answers, and it broke her heart that she had none. We'll figure something out, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Maybe we can find work in Cheyenne. I can cook, clean. You're good with horses. Someone will need us. But even as she said it, she knew how hard it would be. 2 young people with no connections, no references, competing against hundreds of others in the same desperate situation. The Wyoming Territory was full of people trying to make their way, and jobs were scarce. That night, unable to sleep, Susanna stood on the porch and looked up at the stars. They were so bright out here, away from town, a vast carpet of light across the black sky. Her father used to stand in this exact spot and do the same thing. He would smoke his pipe and gaze up at the heavens, and sometimes he would talk about his dreams for the ranch, for their future. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered to the night. "I tried. I really tried." The wind carried her words away, offering no comfort in return. 2 days before the foreclosure was set to be finalized, Susanna made one last trip into Kelton. She needed to purchase a few supplies for the journey they would be making, heading east toward Cheyenne with what little money they had left. The general store was quiet when she entered, just old Mr. Chen behind the counter, sorting through a delivery of goods. "Miss Barrett," he said, his weathered face creasing with concern. "I heard about your troubles. I'm very sorry." "Thank you, Mr. Chen." She gathered what she needed, basic foodstuffs and a new canteen to replace the one with the leak. As he tallied up her purchases, the door opened behind her. She knew who it was before she turned around. She could feel the presence, large and solid, changing the very air in the room. The mountain man from a few days ago stood in the doorway, his broad frame nearly filling it. "Afternoon," he said, nodding to Mr. Chen. "Mr. Stone," the shopkeeper replied. "Good to see you again. Need more supplies. Just a few things." The mountain man's eyes flicked to Susanna, and again she felt the weight of that gaze. This time, however, she saw something else there. Recognition. He had remembered her from the street, just as she had remembered him. Susanna quickly paid for her items and made to leave, but as she passed the mountain man, he spoke. "You're the Barrett girl." It wasn't a question. She paused, surprised. "I am, Susanna Barrett. Gabriel Stone." He didn't offer his hand, just stood there studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "Heard about your situation. The ranch." Of course he had. Everyone in the territory probably knew by now. Shame heated her cheeks. "News travels fast." "Pemberton's a snake," Gabriel said bluntly. "Begging your pardon for the language, but it's the truth. He's foreclosed on half a dozen families in the last 2 years. Sells the properties to a land company out of Cheyenne for twice what the debt was worth. Makes a nice profit on the side, I'd wager." Susanna's breath caught. "What?" "You didn't know?" Gabriel's expression darkened. "That's how he works. Gives out loans he knows people will struggle to repay, then swoops in when they default. Happened to the Hendersons last year and the Mitchells before that." The information hit Susanna like a physical blow. Her father's loan, the one that was destroying everything, had been a trap from the beginning. Pemberton had been planning this all along. "That can't be legal," she said, her voice shaking with renewed anger. "Might not be, but who's going to challenge it? He's got lawyers and connections. The folks he's foreclosing on are barely scraping by. They don't have the means to fight back." Gabriel paused, then added quietly, "I'm sorry for your trouble. Your pa was a good man. He helped me out once few years back. You knew my father, not well. But I came through during a bad winter, half froze and out of supplies. He gave me food and a place to sleep in your barn, wouldn't take a dime for it. Said any man caught in the mountains in winter deserved a helping hand." Gabriel's expression softened slightly at the memory. "I don't forget kindnesses like that." Tears pricked at Susanna's eyes. That sounded exactly like something her father would do. "Thank you for telling me," she managed. Gabriel nodded once, then turned his attention to Mr. Chen, clearly considering the conversation over. Susanna left the store, her mind reeling with this new information. It didn't change anything, not really. Knowing that Pemberton was corrupt didn't help her save the ranch, but it added fuel to the fire of her anger, gave her rage a clearer target. She was untying her horse from the hitching post when she heard shouting from down the street. A crowd was gathering near the bank. Curious and wary, Susanna led her horse closer to see what the commotion was about. A farmer she recognized, Thomas Reed, was standing in front of the bank, red-faced and furious. Pemberton stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men who looked like hired muscle. "You told me I had until the end of harvest," Reed was shouting. "I've got crops in the ground. You can't do this now. The terms of your loan have been accelerated due to your failure to make the last 2 payments," Pemberton said coldly. "You have 1 week to vacate. I've got nowhere to go, my wife, my children. That is not the bank's concern." Pemberton turned to go back inside. Reed lunged forward, grabbing Pemberton's arm. "You can't do this." One of the hired men moved fast, striking Reed across the face with the back of his hand. The farmer went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. His wife, who had been standing at the edge of the crowd, screamed and ran to him. The crowd muttered angrily, but no one moved to help. What could they do? Pemberton had the law on his side, corrupt or not. Susanna felt sick watching it. This was what awaited her family in 2 days' time if they hadn't already left. Humiliation, violence, the complete destruction of everything they had worked for. She was about to turn away when she saw Gabriel Stone emerging from the general store, his arms full of supplies. He took in the scene with one quick glance, his expression hardening. He set his supplies down carefully on the sidewalk and walked toward the bank. The crowd parted for him instinctively, perhaps sensing the coiled danger in his movements. Gabriel stopped in front of Pemberton, his considerable height and breadth making the banker look like a scarecrow by comparison. "Seems to me you're being a bit harsh, Pemberton," Gabriel said quietly. "This is none of your concern, Stone. This is a legal matter between the bank and Mr. Reed." "Legal maybe, right? That's another question." Gabriel looked down at Reed, who was being helped to his feet by his wife. "Man says you told him he had until harvest. That true?" "The bank reserves the right to modify the terms when circumstances warrant," Pemberton said stiffly. "Circumstances like you wanting to steal his land and sell it for profit." Gabriel's voice was still quiet, but there was steel beneath it. Pemberton's face flushed. "How dare you accuse me? I am conducting legitimate business according to the law." "The law isn't always the same as justice," Gabriel said. He glanced at the two hired men. "You planning to have your dogs here try to intimidate me too?" The two men looked at Gabriel's massive frame and wisely chose to stay where they were. Pemberton sputtered with rage. "You have no authority here. The bank will take possession of the Reed property as scheduled. If you interfere, I will have you arrested." Gabriel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll see about that." He turned and walked back to collect his supplies, leaving Pemberton shaking with fury. The crowd dispersed slowly, helping Reed and his family away. Susanna stood frozen, watching Gabriel Stone gather his things and head toward a massive horse tied up near the general store. The animal was as impressive as its owner, a sturdy buckskin that looked like it could carry a mountain. Without fully thinking it through, Susanna found herself following him. "Mr. Stone," she called out. He turned, one hand on his horse's neck. Up close he was even more imposing. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did back there. For standing up to him." "Didn't accomplish much," Gabriel said. "Reed's still going to lose his farm. But you tried. That's more than anyone else did." Susanna hesitated, then asked, "You said my father helped you once. I don't suppose there's any chance you could help me now." Gabriel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. "What kind of help are you looking for?" "I don't know," Susanna admitted. "I'm desperate. I'll lose everything in 2 days. I just thought maybe you might know someone, or maybe you've heard of some kind of work I could do, or I don't know." Her voice trailed off. She felt foolish now, chasing after a stranger and begging for help he couldn't possibly provide. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, just looking at her. Then he said, "How much is the note for? The debt on your ranch, $3,000. The number felt obscene saying it out loud. Gabriel whistled low. "That's a considerable sum." "I know, it's impossible. I shouldn't have bothered you. I'm sorry." Susanna turned to go, embarrassment flooding through her. "Hold on," Gabriel said. She stopped, looking back at him. "I've got some savings," he said slowly, as if thinking through each word carefully. "From years of trapping. I don't spend much living up in the mountains." "Don't have much use for money up there." Susanna's heart began to pound. "Mr. Stone, I couldn't possibly ask you to lend me money. I'd never be able to pay you back." "I'm not talking about a loan," Gabriel said. "I'm talking about buying the note from Pemberton." "I don't understand." "If I buy the note, the debt transfers to me. Then I could do whatever I wanted with it." His eyes held her steadily, including tearing it up. Susanna felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "You would do that for me? For someone you don't even know, I knew your father. He was a good man. And Pemberton's a snake who needs to be stopped from ruining more families." Gabriel shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable with the attention. "Besides, I've got no use for $3,000. Might as well do some good with it." "I can't let you do that," Susanna said, even though every fiber of her being was screaming at her to accept, to grab onto this miracle with both hands. "It's too much. It wouldn't be right." "Why not?" "Because I'd be in your debt. I'd owe you everything, and I'd never be able to repay you." Gabriel considered this. "What if you didn't owe me anything? What if I just bought the note and gave it to you free and clear, a gift in memory of your father's kindness?" Susanna shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "People don't do things like that. There's always a catch. Always something they want in return." "I'm not most people," Gabriel said simply. "I live in the mountains, Miss Barrett. I've got no family, no ties. I come to town twice a year to sell my furs and buy supplies, then I go back to the high country. Your land, your family's struggles, they don't benefit me at all. But maybe I can do one good thing in this world. Maybe that's enough. I don't know what to say. Say yes or no. I need to know if this is something you want before I go talk to Pemberton." Susanna tried to think clearly, but her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and hope and fear. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen. Strangers didn't appear out of nowhere and save your life for no reason. But Gabriel Stone stood there, solid and real and waiting for her answer. And she thought about Daniel, about her home, about her parents who were gone but whose memory deserved better than to see everything they built scattered to the wind. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, please. If you're truly willing to do this, then yes." Gabriel nodded once. "Stay here. This shouldn't take long." He left her standing there, shaking from head to toe as he walked back toward the bank. Susanna watched him go, this mountain of a man who had walked into her life and offered salvation. She didn't understand it, didn't understand him. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. Gabriel was inside the bank for nearly an hour. Susanna waited outside, unable to make herself leave, barely able to breathe. Other people came and went, casting her curious glances. She didn't care. All she could do was stare at the bank's door and pray that this wasn't some cruel dream she would wake from. When Gabriel finally emerged, he was holding papers. His face was expressionless as he walked toward her, and for a terrible moment she thought it hadn't worked, that Pemberton had refused or that Gabriel had changed his mind. Then he handed her the papers. "It's done," he said. "The note is paid in full." Pemberton wasn't happy about it, but money is money. He couldn't refuse. Susanna looked down at the documents in her hands. She saw her father's name, saw the debt amount, saw the stamp that said "paid in full" in bold letters. It was real. It was actually real. Her legs gave out. Gabriel caught her before she hit the ground, his strong hands gripping her arms and steadying her. He guided her to a bench outside the general store and made her sit. "Breathe," he said. "Just breathe." Susanna tried, but the sobs were coming now, great heaving gasps of relief and gratitude and disbelief. She had been drowning, and this man had pulled her to shore. She had been lost, and he had shown her the way home. "I don't understand," she managed between sobs. "Why would you do this?" Gabriel crouched down in front of her so they were at eye level. This close, she could see the weathering on his face, the small scars that told stories of a hard life. But his eyes were kind, and his voice was gentle when he spoke. "Because I can," he said. "Because your father helped me when he didn't have to. Because Pemberton deserves to lose at least one of his schemes. Take your pick of reasons, Miss Barrett. The why doesn't matter as much as the what. You're free. Your ranch is yours again. That's all that counts. How can I ever thank you?" "You don't need to thank me. Just take care of your brother and make that ranch work. That'll be thanks enough." He started to stand, and Susanna reached out instinctively, grabbing his hand. His palm was calloused and hard, a working man's hand, but his grip was careful, as if he was afraid of his own strength. "Please," she said, "at least let me offer you a meal. Let me do something to show my gratitude." Gabriel hesitated. She could see the refusal forming on his lips, could see that he was a man accustomed to solitude and uncomfortable with thanks. But something in her expression must have convinced him, because he finally nodded. "One meal," he agreed. "Then I need to head back to the mountains. Winter comes early up there, and I've got work to do preparing." "Come to the ranch," Susanna said. "Tomorrow evening, please. I'm not much of a cook, but I can at least make you a decent supper." "Tomorrow evening, then." He released her hand and stood, collecting his horse's reins. Susanna watched him mount up, moving with an easy grace despite his size. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of farewell, then rode off down the main street, leaving her sitting on that bench, clutching the papers that represented her salvation. She sat there for a long time, just holding those documents and crying. People passed by, and she didn't care what they thought. Let them wonder. Let them stare. She was free. Her home was safe. Her brother would have a future, and tomorrow she would cook dinner for the man who had saved them. The ride back to the ranch passed in a daze. Susanna kept touching the papers in her saddlebag, needing to confirm they were still there, that this wasn't some elaborate fantasy her desperate mind had conjured. When she finally reached the house and saw Daniel mending fence near the barn, she called out to him, her voice breaking with emotion. He dropped his tools and ran to her, worry creasing his young face. "Susanna, what's wrong? What happened?" "Nothing's wrong," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Everything's right. Danny, we're saved. The debt, the foreclosure, it's over." She explained it all as they walked to the house together, watching his expression transform from confusion to disbelief to joy. He whooped with happiness, picked her up and spun her around despite her protests, acting like the boy he still was underneath all the worry he had been carrying. "How did this happen?" he asked, setting her down. "Who is this Gabriel Stone?" "I don't really know," Susanna admitted. "He's a mountain man, a trapper. He knew Papa, said Papa helped him once, and now he's helped us. We have to repay him somehow. He doesn't want repayment, he made that very clear." Susanna pulled out the papers and showed them to her brother. "He bought the note and gave it to us." Just like that. Daniel stared at the documents with the same wonder she had felt. "There are still good people in the world," he said softly. "I was starting to forget that. So was I." They spent the rest of the day in a state of celebratory relief, making plans for the ranch, talking about how they would rebuild, how they would make the place thrive again. It felt like a weight had been lifted from both their shoulders, like they could breathe freely for the first time in months. That night, Susanna lay in bed and thought about Gabriel Stone. She pictured his face, weathered and strong, his eyes gray as storm clouds, his hands large enough to break stone but gentle when he had steadied her. Who was he really? Where did he come from? What had driven him to the mountains, to a life of solitude, and why, truly, had he saved her? She fell asleep with questions spinning through her mind and woke the next morning with purpose burning in her chest. She was going to make Gabriel Stone the best meal he had ever tasted. It was the least she could do. Susanna spent the entire day preparing. She killed one of their chickens, the fat hen that had stopped laying, and roasted it with herbs from her mother's garden. She made biscuits from scratch, light and fluffy the way her mother had taught her. She cooked beans with bacon and molasses, baked an apple pie using the last of their precious sugar and the apples from their small orchard. She cleaned the house until it shone, set the table with her mother's good china, and even picked wildflowers to put in a vase as a centerpiece. Daniel helped, though he teased her about going to so much trouble. "It's just dinner, Susanna. You're acting like it's a fancy party." "This man saved our home," Susanna said firmly. "The least I can do is treat him with respect and gratitude." But if she was honest with herself, it wasn't just gratitude driving her preparations. She wanted Gabriel Stone to see that she was capable, that she was worthy of the gift he had given her. She wanted to impress him, though she couldn't quite articulate why that mattered so much. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Susanna changed into her Sunday dress, the green one that brought out her eyes. She brushed her dark hair until it shone and pinned it up carefully. When she caught Daniel watching her with a knowing smile, she felt her cheeks heat. "Don't say a word," she warned. "Wouldn't dream of it," he said, but his grin said otherwise. Gabriel arrived just as the last light was fading from the sky. Susanna heard his horse before she saw him, and her heart started racing in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. She smoothed her dress one more time and went to the door. He had cleaned up for the occasion. His hair was still long but had been washed and tied back neatly. His beard was trimmed. He wore what were probably his best clothes, which still looked rough by town standards but were clean and mended. In his hands he carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Evening, Miss Barrett," he said. "Hope I'm not late. You're right on time. Please come in." He had to duck slightly to get through the doorway, and once inside his size seemed to fill the small room. But he moved carefully, aware of his bulk, and when he saw the table set so nicely, surprise flickered across his face. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," he said. "Yes, I did." Susanna took the bundle from him. "What's this?" "Meat. From a deer I took a few days back. Thought you might be able to use it." "That's very kind of you, thank you." She set it on the counter, then gestured to the table. "Please sit, dinner's ready." Daniel joined them, and for a few minutes there was only the clatter of dishes being passed and food being served. Susanna watched nervously as Gabriel took his first bite of chicken, waiting for his reaction. He chewed slowly, then nodded. "This is good, real good." Relief flooded through her. "I'm glad you like it." They ate in relative silence at first, the conversation stilted and awkward. But gradually, as the food disappeared and tension eased, they began to talk more naturally. Daniel asked Gabriel about life in the mountains, his young face alight with fascination as Gabriel described tracking animals through deep snow, reading the forest like a book, surviving in conditions that would kill most men. "Isn't it lonely?" Susanna asked. "Being up there all by yourself?" Gabriel considered the question. "Sometimes, but it's a peaceful kind of loneliness. Down here in towns with people there's a lot of noise, a lot of complication. Up there everything is simple. You wake up, you do what needs doing, you sleep. The mountains don't lie to you. They don't pretend to be something they're not." "It sounds like you don't think much of people," Daniel said. "I've known some good ones," Gabriel said, glancing at Susanna. "But I've known plenty of bad ones too. I guess I just prefer the honesty of the wilderness. An animal trying to kill you is at least straightforward about it." "Is that what happened?" Susanna asked softly. "Did someone hurt you? Is that why you left civilization behind?" Gabriel's expression closed off, and Susanna immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry. That was too personal." "It's all right." Gabriel set down his fork. "I grew up in Missouri farm country, had a family, a normal life. Then the war came. The war. The one that had torn the country apart just over a decade ago." Susanna and Daniel both leaned forward, listening intently. "I was 18 when I enlisted," Gabriel continued. "Thought I was doing something noble, fighting for what was right. But war isn't noble. It's just blood and death and seeing things that change you forever." He paused, his eyes distant. I came back to find my parents dead from fever, my farm sold for taxes I couldn't pay while I was gone. My girl, the one I thought I'd marry, she'd wed someone else. Couldn't blame her for that. She'd thought I was dead. I'm so sorry, Susanna said, her heart aching for him. I tried to settle back into normal life. Worked as a ranch hand for a while. But I couldn't do it. Couldn't be around people, couldn't stand the noise and the falseness of it all. So I headed west, kept going until I hit the mountains, and that's where I stayed. That was 8 years ago. Do you ever think about coming back? Daniel asked. Living among people again. Used to think about it all the time. Now, Gabriel shrugged. I'm not sure I'd fit anymore. The mountains are my home now. Susanna felt an unexpected pang at those words, though she couldn't say why. This man was a stranger, would remain a stranger. After tonight, he would go back to his mountains and she would likely never see him again. That was fine. That was what he wanted. So why did the thought make her sad? After dinner, Susanna served the apple pie and Gabriel's eyes actually widened at his first bite. This might be the best thing I've ever eaten, he said with genuine appreciation. My mother's recipe, Susanna said, pleased. She made the best pies in the county. She taught you well. After they had eaten their fill, Daniel excused himself to do the evening chores, leaving Susanna and Gabriel alone at the table. The lamp burned low between them, casting warm light across the worn wood. Outside, crickets sang their evening song. I still can't quite believe what you did, Susanna said quietly. $3,000, that's a fortune. It's money I didn't need. But you earned it. Years of hard work, dangerous work, and you just gave it away. Gabriel looked at her steadily. Is that so hard to understand? Yes, Susanna admitted. In my experience, people don't help others without expecting something in return. Then your experience has been with the wrong kind of people. Gabriel leaned back in his chair. I told you why I did it. Your father's kindness, Pemberton's corruption. Those are reasons enough. Are they the only reasons? The question hung in the air between them. Gabriel held her gaze and Susanna felt her breath catch. There was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her pulse quicken. Why do you ask? Gabriel said finally. Because when you look at me, I feel like you see me, really see me, not just some poor girl who needed saving. Susanna felt her cheeks warm but pressed on. I don't know you, Mr. Stone, but I'd like to. Gabriel, he said. You can call me Gabriel. Gabriel, she repeated, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. Why did you really help me? He was quiet for a long moment, his weathered fingers tracing patterns on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he was clearly trying to hide. Because when I saw you standing in that street, looking so desperate and lost, I saw myself. Years ago, when I had nothing and nowhere to go. I saw someone worth saving. He paused. And because when you looked at me, you didn't see a wild man or someone to be afraid of. You saw someone who might help. You had hope in your eyes, even when you had no reason to hope. I admired that. Susanna's throat tightened. I don't feel very admirable. I feel like I've been barely holding on by my fingernails. Holding on is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Susanna found herself not wanting the evening to end. She wanted to keep talking to this man, to learn more about him, to understand the contradiction he represented. Fierce and gentle, isolated and generous. Hard as stone on the outside, but with something soft hidden underneath. Finally, Gabriel stood. I should be heading out. Got a long ride back to the mountains. Yes, I've got a cabin up past the tree line. Need to get it ready for winter, stock up on supplies. Once the heavy snows hit, I'm up there until spring. That's months away, Susanna said, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. You're leaving already. No reason to stay in town. I've done what I came to do." She walked him to the door, and Daniel appeared from the barn to say goodbye and thank Gabriel again. They shook hands, and Susanna could see the respect in her brother's eyes. Gabriel was exactly the kind of man a boy like Daniel would look up to: strong, capable, honorable. When Daniel went back to finish the chores, Gabriel turned to Susanna. "You take care of yourself," he said. "And that ranch, make it work, make it thrive. That's what your father would have wanted." "I will," she promised. Then, acting on impulse, she stepped forward and hugged him. He went rigid with surprise. Clearly, human contact was not something he was accustomed to. But after a moment, his arms came up and wrapped around her, careful and gentle despite their strength. She felt enveloped by his warmth, his solidity. She felt safe in a way she hadn't felt since before her father died. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For everything." When she pulled back, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. It was there for just a moment, then gone, hidden behind his usual guarded expression. But she had seen it: want, longing, connection. "Goodbye, Susanna," he said, his voice rough. He mounted his horse and rode away into the darkness, and Susanna stood on the porch watching until even the sound of hoofbeats had faded into the night. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work. With the weight of the foreclosure lifted, Susanna and Daniel threw themselves into restoring the ranch. They fixed fences, repaired the barn, worked with the remaining cattle. Slowly, painfully slowly, things began to improve. But through it all, Susanna found her thoughts drifting to Gabriel. She would be kneading bread and think about his hands, so strong but so careful. She would be riding the fence line and remember his voice, deep and steady. She would lie in bed at night and wonder what he was doing up in those mountains, if he ever thought about her. It was foolish, she told herself. He was gone, back to his solitary life. He had done his good deed, and now he was finished with her. She should be grateful for what he had given her and move on with her life. But gratitude wasn't the only thing she felt. October came, bringing crisp mornings and the golden beauty of fall. Susanna was in the garden, harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost, when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and her heart nearly stopped. Gabriel Stone was riding up the path toward the house. He looked even more rugged than she remembered, his hair longer, his face more weathered from time in the high country. But his gray eyes were the same, and when they landed on her, she saw something leap to life in them. "Gabriel," she breathed, straightening up, "I didn't expect to see you again." He dismounted, moving with that same careful grace. "Wasn't planning on coming back," he admitted, "but I couldn't stay away." "Why not?" He stepped closer, and she could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. This was a man not used to expressing emotion, not used to vulnerability. But when he spoke, his words were honest and raw. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you. I tried. God knows I tried. But every day up there in those mountains, I found myself wondering what you were doing, if you were all right, if you ever thought about me." He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "I came back to see if what I felt that night was real, or if it was just my imagination." Susanna's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What did you feel?" "Something I haven't felt in a very long time." He looked at her directly, unflinching. "Connection, hope, the possibility that maybe I don't have to be alone forever." She closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and took his hand in hers. "It was real. I felt it too." Relief washed over his face, and for the first time since she had met him, Gabriel smiled. It transformed his entire expression, softening the hard edges, revealing the man he might have been before life had beaten him down. "I don't know how this works," he said. "I'm not good at being around people. I don't know how to court a woman or say pretty words. I've been alone for so long, I don't know if I remember how to be any other way. I don't need pretty words, Susanna said. I just need honesty. Can you give me that? Yes, always. Then that's enough. Daniel appeared from the barn, saw Gabriel, and his face split into a grin. Mr. Stone. You came back. Seems that way, Gabriel said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Over the next hours, Gabriel helped them with various tasks around the ranch, and Susanna was amazed at how much easier everything became with his strength and skill. He repaired things that had been broken for months, moved heavy equipment that she and Daniel had struggled with. He worked with quiet efficiency, never complaining, seemingly tireless. As the sun began to set, Daniel tactfully announced he was going into town to visit a friend, leaving Gabriel and Susanna alone. They sat on the porch together, watching the sky turn colors. "Are you going back to the mountains?" Susanna asked, dreading the answer. "Eventually. I have to. My cabin, my traps, my whole life is up there." Gabriel paused. "But I was thinking maybe I could come down more often, visit when I can, if you'd want that." "I'd want that very much." He reached over and took her hand, his rough palm against her smaller one. "I'm not an easy man, Susanna. I've got ghosts. I've got habits that years of living alone have carved into me. I'm probably going to frustrate you and drive you crazy." "I'm not looking for easy," Susanna said. "I'm looking for real, and you're the most real person I've ever met." Gabriel turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe the first time I saw you, maybe when you hugged me goodbye, maybe every moment in between. But it's happening and I can't stop it, don't want to stop it." Susanna felt tears welling up, but they were good tears this time, happy tears. "I'm falling in love with you too. It's crazy and fast and makes no logical sense, but it's true. Can I kiss you?" Gabriel asked, his voice rough with emotion. Instead of answering, Susanna leaned in and kissed him. His lips were soft despite the roughness of his beard. He kissed her gently at first, as if afraid he might break her. But when she pressed closer, his arms came around her, and the kiss deepened. It was sweet and passionate and full of all the longing they had both been carrying. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I want to court you properly," Gabriel said. "I want to do this right. Then court me. It won't be traditional. I can't be here all the time." "I don't need traditional. I just need you." They talked long into the night, making plans, sharing dreams, learning each other's stories. Gabriel told her about his childhood, about his parents who had loved each other fiercely, about the war that had stolen his innocence, about finding peace in the mountains. Susanna told him about her mother, who had died when she was 15, about her father's dreams for the ranch, about the fear she had lived with these last months, and the relief and joy she felt now. "I never thought I'd have this," Gabriel admitted as the moon rose high above them. "Someone to share things with, someone who understands." "You have it now," Susanna said. "You have me." He pulled her close, and they sat there under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms, feeling like the luckiest people alive. True to his word, Gabriel began courting Susanna. He would come down from the mountains every few weeks, staying for a few days before heading back. Each visit was precious, packed with work and conversation and stolen moments of affection. He helped rebuild the ranch, using his considerable strength and wilderness skills to make improvements that would have taken Susanna and Daniel months to accomplish alone. Daniel adored him, following him around and soaking up every bit of knowledge Gabriel was willing to share about tracking, hunting, and survival. Gabriel, for his part, seemed to enjoy having someone to teach, and the two of them would disappear for hours, coming back with stories of deer they had tracked or fish they had caught. As autumn deepened into early winter, Susanna found herself dreading the approaching season. Once the heavy snows came, Gabriel would be trapped in the high country until spring. That could be 4 or 5 months without seeing him. The thought was unbearable. "Come with me," Gabriel said one November evening as they sat by the fire. Daniel had already gone to bed, leaving them alone. Susanna looked at him in surprise. "What? Come with me to the mountains? You and Daniel both. Spend the winter at my cabin. Gabriel, I can't abandon the ranch for an entire winter. The cattle can winter in the low pastures with some hay put by. We can hire someone to check on them once a week. The house will be fine empty for a few months." He took her hands. "I want to show you my world, Susanna. I want to share that part of my life with you, and I don't want to go months without seeing you." "What about Daniel? He's just a boy." "He's 16. When I was 16, I was working a full-time job on my father's farm. He's capable, and he'd love it up there. I know he would." Susanna wanted to say yes more than anything, but it was a huge decision, fraught with risk and impropriety. An unmarried woman spending the winter alone with a man. Even with her brother as chaperone, it would cause scandal. "What are you really asking me, Gabriel?" she said quietly. He met her eyes steadily. "I'm asking you to marry me before we go up to the mountains. I'm asking you to be my wife." Susanna's breath caught. "You want to marry me?" "I want it more than anything. I love you, Susanna. I want to spend my life with you, whether that's in the mountains or down here on this ranch or anywhere else. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a life with you." He paused. "I know it's fast. I know people will say we're rushing. But when you've lived as long as I have knowing what loneliness feels like, you don't waste time when you find something real." "Yes," Susanna said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Gabriel pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "When?" Susanna asked. "As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if we can manage it." "Tomorrow," Susanna laughed. "Gabriel, there's so much to prepare." "What's to prepare?" "We love each other. We want to be together. Everything else is just details." In the end, they compromised on 3 days. That gave them enough time to ride into Kelton, speak with the minister, and arrange a simple ceremony. Daniel was thrilled at the news, giving Gabriel an enthusiastic handshake and Susanna a bear hug. "I knew it," he said, grinning. "I knew from that first dinner that you two were perfect for each other." The wedding took place in the small church on a cold, clear November morning. Susanna wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk. It fit her almost perfectly, needing only minor adjustments. Gabriel wore his best clothes, and someone had convinced him to trim his beard even shorter, revealing more of his strong jawline. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Besides the minister, only Daniel and a few close friends from town attended. When Gabriel said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and Susanna could see the truth of his feelings in his eyes. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you for as long as I live," he said. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope for the future. I won't waste that gift." Susanna's own vows were tearful but no less sincere. "You saved my home, but more than that, you saved me. You showed me that there is still goodness in the world, still people worth believing in. I love you with everything I am, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel kissed her tenderly, and the small gathering burst into applause. After a modest celebration at the hotel's dining room, they returned to the ranch to prepare for the journey to the mountains. Susanna had never been further than Kelton and Cheyenne in her entire life. The thought of spending months in the high country was both terrifying and exhilarating. They spent a week making preparations. Gabriel went over his cabin's provisions, making lists of what they would need to bring. They hired Tom Williams, an older rancher from a neighboring spread, to check on their cattle and the property once a week through the winter. Susanna and Daniel packed carefully, trying to balance bringing enough with not overloading the horses. Finally, on a bright December morning, they set out. 3 people on horseback, leading 2 pack animals laden with supplies, heading toward the mountains that rose like giants on the western horizon. The journey took 3 days. They started on relatively well-traveled trails, but as they climbed higher, the paths became little more than game tracks that only Gabriel's experienced eye could follow. The air grew thinner and colder. The vegetation changed from grassland to pine forest to bare rock and twisted trees. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and Gabriel pointed ahead. "There," he said. "That's home." Susanna looked and gasped. The cabin sat in a small clearing, backed up against a cliff face that would protect it from the worst of the winter winds. It was larger than she had expected, built from sturdy logs with a stone chimney. Nearby was a barn for the horses and animals, and a small stream ran past the clearing, currently half frozen but still flowing. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Gabriel smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "It's not fancy, but it's solid. Keeps the cold out and the warmth in. That's what matters up here." They spent the rest of the day unloading supplies and getting settled. The interior of the cabin was simple but well built. There was one large main room with a fireplace, a smaller bedroom sectioned off, and a loft space where Daniel would sleep. The furniture was all handmade, rough but functional. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Gabriel built up a fire until the cabin glowed with warmth. Susanna cooked their first meal as a married couple in the mountains. A simple stew from dried meat and vegetables, but it tasted like a feast. After dinner, Daniel climbed up to the loft, leaving Gabriel and Susanna alone by the fire. Gabriel had been careful to be respectful, not assuming anything despite their new marriage. But now, as they sat together, Susanna reached for his hand. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "So am I," Gabriel said, surprising her. "It's been a very long time since I've been with a woman. And I care about you so much. I want to do right by you." "Just love me," Susanna said. "That's all I need." He did. They came together that night with tenderness and passion, learning each other in the most intimate way. Gabriel was gentle, always making sure she was comfortable, that he wasn't hurting her. And when it was over, they lay tangled together beneath thick furs, watching the firelight dance on the ceiling. "I never thought I'd be this happy," Gabriel murmured, stroking her hair. "I'd made peace with being alone, thought that was my fate. Then you walked into my life and changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Susanna said. "You saved me in more ways than you know." The winter that followed was unlike anything Susanna had ever experienced. The snows came heavy and frequent, piling up around the cabin until they were living in a world of white. Gabriel taught her and Daniel how to survive in this harsh environment, how to read the weather, how to move through deep snow, how to hunt and trap. Daniel thrived in the mountains. He grew stronger, more confident, learning skills from Gabriel that would serve him for the rest of his life. He proved to have a natural talent for tracking and quickly became an asset on their hunting trips. Susanna, too, adapted to the mountain life. She learned to make snowshoes, to preserve meat, to cook in ways that stretched their supplies. She learned to read the forest the way Gabriel did, seeing signs and stories in tracks and broken branches. But more than just survival skills, she learned about her husband. Living in such close quarters through the long winter nights, they talked for hours. Gabriel opened up in ways she suspected he never had before, sharing stories from his past, his fears, his dreams. She learned that beneath his rough exterior was a man of deep feeling and unexpected poetry. He saw beauty in the natural world that most people overlooked, and she fell more deeply in love with him every day. They made love often, learning each other's bodies, finding joy in their physical connection. Gabriel was always careful with her, mindful of his strength, but Susanna encouraged him to be less restrained. She wasn't fragile. She was strong in her own way. One night in January, as a blizzard howled outside, they lay together in bed and Susanna said, "I think I'm pregnant." Gabriel went very still. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I've missed my monthly courses and I've been feeling sick in the mornings." She looked at him, trying to read his expression. "How do you feel about that?" For a moment, he didn't answer and Susanna felt a flutter of fear. Maybe he didn't want children. Maybe this was too much, too fast. Then Gabriel's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He pulled her close, kissing her face, her neck, her shoulders. "I'm happy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "So happy. A child, our child. I never thought I'd have this, a family of my own. So you're not angry, angry. Susanna, you've given me everything, a reason to live, a reason to hope. And now this." He placed his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This is more than I ever dreamed possible." They told Daniel the next morning. He was initially shocked, then excited. "I'm going to be an uncle," he said, testing out the words. "That's wonderful." As the pregnancy progressed through the remainder of the winter, Gabriel became even more protective of Susanna. He insisted she not overwork herself, took on more of the household tasks, made sure she was eating enough. It was sweet, but sometimes overwhelming. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying firewood. "I can still work." "I know, I just want to make sure you're safe, you and the baby." "We're safe. You keep us safe just by being here." Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow began to melt, revealing the earth beneath. Streams swelled with runoff. Animals emerged from their winter hiding places. And finally, in late April, the trails were clear enough to make the journey back down to the ranch. Susanna was 5 months pregnant by then, showing clearly. The ride down was slower and more careful, with Gabriel fussing over her constantly. But eventually, they made it back to find the ranch in good condition. Tom Williams had kept his word, checking on things regularly, and even the cattle had made it through the winter relatively unscathed. "It's good to be home," Susanna said, standing on the porch and looking out over the land. Then she turned to Gabriel. "But the cabin is home too now. Wherever you are is home." They settled into a new routine. Gabriel still went up to the mountains occasionally to check his trap lines and maintain the cabin, but he never stayed away for more than a few days. His focus had shifted. The ranch became as much his project as Susanna's, and he threw himself into improving it with the same intensity he brought to everything. With Gabriel's help and Daniel's growing maturity, the ranch began to truly prosper. They bought more cattle. They repaired and expanded the barn. Gabriel's knowledge of the land and animals proved invaluable, and soon other ranchers were coming to ask his advice on various matters. In September, as the leaves were turning gold and the air carried the first hints of coming autumn, Susanna went into labor. The birth was long and hard, and there were moments when Gabriel paced outside like a caged bear, terrified and helpless. But finally, in the early morning hours, his son was born. They named him Thomas, after Susanna's father. Gabriel held his son with infinite care, this huge mountain man cradling the tiny infant like he was made of glass. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he looked at his child. "He's perfect," Gabriel whispered. "Absolutely perfect. He has your eyes," Susanna said, exhausted but happy. Over the following years, their family and their ranch continued to grow. 2 years after Thomas was born, they had a daughter they named Mary, after Gabriel's mother. She was a spirited child with Susanna's dark hair and Gabriel's determination. The ranch thrived under their care. They became known throughout the territory for their quality cattle and their fair dealings. Daniel grew into a fine young man, eventually starting his own spread on land adjacent to theirs. He married a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Catherine, and started his own family. Gabriel never completely gave up his mountain cabin. Once or twice a year, he would make the journey up, sometimes taking Thomas or Mary with him as they grew old enough, teaching them the skills his own father had never gotten the chance to teach him. But he always came back to Susanna, to the ranch, to the life they had built together. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch together, watching the sun set over their land and marvel at how different their lives had become. "You ever regret it?" Susanna asked once. "Giving up your solitary life in the mountains?" Gabriel looked at her, at the gray threading through her hair, at the lines around her eyes that came from years of smiling, and shook his head. "Not for a single moment. You gave me something I thought was lost forever. A family, a purpose, love." He took her hand, his thumb tracing over her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar over the years. "The best thing I ever did was walk into that general store the day you were there. The best decision I ever made was buying that note and giving you your freedom." "You gave me more than freedom," Susanna said. "You gave me everything." Years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet intensity. Mary grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's kindness and her father's fierce independence. They added 2 more children to their family, another son named Daniel after Susanna's brother, and a daughter they named Grace. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, Gabriel and Susanna were there, standing in the crowd, watching history being made. They had been married 14 years by then, and their love had only deepened with time. Pemberton, the banker who had tried to steal their home, had eventually been caught in his schemes. A group of angry farmers and ranchers had banded together, hired a lawyer from Cheyenne, and exposed his fraudulent practices. He had fled the territory in disgrace, and a new, more honest banker had taken his place. Gabriel's reputation as both a skilled mountain man and a fair rancher grew throughout Wyoming. People sought his counsel on matters ranging from tracking outlaws to settling property disputes. He served for a time as a marshal, using his tracking skills to bring criminals to justice, though he always returned to the ranch and his family as quickly as possible. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Gabriel took Susanna back up to the mountain cabin, just the 2 of them. Their children were old enough to manage without them for a few weeks, and they wanted to return to the place where they had first lived as husband and wife. The cabin was exactly as they remembered, and as they stood in the clearing, breathing in the mountain air, Susanna felt like she was 22 again, newly married and full of hope for the future. "You remember our first winter here?" she asked, leaning against Gabriel's solid warmth. "Every moment of it," he said. "I remember being terrified I would do something wrong, say something wrong, and you'd realize you'd made a mistake marrying me. I never thought that, not once. I know that now, but back then I couldn't quite believe my luck." He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that never got old. "I still can't sometimes. When I wake up and see you beside me, I have a moment where I think it must be a dream." "It's real," Susanna said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. "We're real. All of it's real." They spent 2 weeks in the cabin, reconnecting, remembering, and making new memories. They talked about their children, their hopes for their futures. Thomas was showing interest in expanding the ranch operations. Mary wanted to become a teacher. Young Daniel was already showing signs of inheriting his father's love for the mountains. And Grace, at 8 years old, was a mystery, interested in everything and nothing, changing her dreams daily. "We've built something good," Gabriel said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Something lasting." "We have," Susanna agreed. "And it all started because you walked into my life when I needed help most. Because you saw someone drowning and reached out a hand. You weren't drowning, you were fighting. That's what I saw. A fighter who just needed a lifeline." Gabriel pulled her closer. "I'm glad I could be that for you, and I'm glad you were brave enough to grab on and hold tight." As the years continued to roll forward, Gabriel and Susanna became the kind of couple that others looked to as an example. Their love remained strong even as their hair turned gray, and their bodies bore the marks of hard work and time. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. They had buried Gabriel's old friend from the mountains who had occasionally visited. They had celebrated weddings as their children married and started families of their own. Thomas married a rancher's daughter and took over the main operations of the ranch, expanding it beyond what even Gabriel had dreamed. Mary did become a teacher, opening a school in Kelton that served the children of the surrounding ranches. Young Daniel eventually followed his father into the mountains, becoming a trapper and guide, though he married and brought his wife up to live in a cabin he built near Gabriel's old one. And Grace surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, traveling east for her education, and then returning to serve the people of Wyoming. Gabriel and Susanna became grandparents many times over, and their home was always full of the laughter of children and grandchildren. The ranch house had been expanded and improved over the years, but the original 4 rooms that Susanna's father had built still stood at its heart. On Gabriel's 60th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and spilled out into the yard. There was music and dancing and more food than an army could eat. And in the middle of it all were Gabriel and Susanna, still holding hands, still looking at each other with the same love that had brought them together all those years ago. Speech. Someone called out and the crowd took up the chant. "Speech, speech." Gabriel, never comfortable being the center of attention, tried to wave them off, but Susanna nudged him forward. He stood, this mountain of a man now weathered and graying but still strong, still solid, and looked around at the faces of his family. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, and everyone laughed because they knew it was true. "But I'll say this. When I was a young man, I thought I knew what life was about. Then I went to war and I learned I didn't know anything. I came back broken, or so I thought. I ran to the mountains because I couldn't face being around people anymore." He paused, his eyes finding Susanna in the crowd. "Then I met this woman. This fierce, strong, beautiful woman who had more courage in her little finger than I had in my whole body. She was fighting to save her home, fighting to protect her brother, fighting to keep going even when everything seemed lost. And something in me recognized something in her. 2 fighters, both struggling, both trying to hold on. Tears were streaming down many faces now, including Susanna's. I helped her because I could, because someone had helped me once, and I wanted to pass that on. But what I didn't know was that in helping her, I was saving myself. She gave me back my life. She gave me a reason to come down from those mountains and rejoin the world. She gave me all of you." He gestured at the assembled family, his voice thick with emotion. "So I guess what I want to say is thank you. Thank you to Susanna for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who didn't know how to be part of a family anymore. Thank you to all of you for being the best thing that ever happened to me." And thank you to whatever force in the universe brought us all together, because this, right here, this is what life is really about. Love. Family. Building something that lasts. He sat down amid thunderous applause and cheering. Susanna wrapped her arms around him, and he held her tight, this woman who had changed everything. The party continued long into the night, but eventually, the crowd dispersed, heading to their own homes or to the bunkhouse and barn where they would sleep before heading out in the morning. Gabriel and Susanna found themselves alone on the porch, their favorite spot, watching the stars. "That was a good speech," Susanna said, snuggling into his side. "Meant every word." "I know you did. That's what made it good." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you ever think about that day, when you walked into the bank and paid off the debt, sometimes? It was one of the easiest decisions I ever made. I saw a problem I could solve, and I solved it. It wasn't that simple. You changed the entire course of my life, of Daniel's life, of all the lives that came after." Susanna looked up at him. "You gave me everything, Gabriel. My home, my family, my future. How do I even begin to thank you for that? You already have. Every day for the last 38 years, you've thanked me just by being here, by loving me, by building this life with me." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm the one who should be grateful. You took a broken man and made him whole again." They sat in comfortable silence, these two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The ranch spread out before them, peaceful in the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. An owl called from the barn. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and home. As the years advanced further, Gabriel and Susanna began to slow down. They turned over more of the ranch operations to Thomas and his sons. They spent more time on the porch, more time with grandchildren, more time just being together. Gabriel's hair went white, and his movements became stiffer, the hard years in the mountains and on the ranch catching up with him. Susanna's hands became gnarled with arthritis, though she still insisted on cooking Sunday dinners for the family. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by time and trial into something unbreakable. They had survived everything life could throw at them and come through together. They had built not just a ranch but a legacy, a family that would continue long after they were gone. On a spring morning in 1920, Gabriel woke before dawn as he always had. He looked over at Susanna, still sleeping peacefully beside him, her face soft and lovely even at 66. They had been married for 44 years. 44 years of joy and struggle, laughter and tears, always side by side. He eased out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her, and went out to the porch to watch the sunrise. This had been his ritual for decades now, greeting the day from this spot where he had first courted Susanna, where he had held his children, where he had watched his family grow. The sun was just touching the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, when he heard the door open behind him. Susanna came out, wrapped in a shawl, and settled into the chair beside him. "Couldn't sleep without you," she said with a smile. "Sorry. Didn't mean to wake you." "I'm glad you did. I'd rather watch the sunrise with you than sleep." They sat together as the sun climbed higher, bringing light to the land they had nurtured for so long. Birds began their morning songs. The world came alive around them. "It's been a good life," Gabriel said quietly. "The best life," Susanna agreed. "I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the parts that were hard, especially not those parts. They made us who we are. They brought us here." She reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of doubt, they were all worth it to have this, to have you. Gabriel raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Susanna Stone. I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing in that street, looking lost but not defeated. And I will love you until my very last breath and beyond. And I love you, Gabriel Stone, my mountain man, my savior, my husband, my heart." They watched the sun complete its rise, flooding the valley with golden light. The ranch spread before them, thriving and beautiful, a testament to what two people could build when they loved each other and worked together. Their children and grandchildren would carry on what they had started, would add their own chapters to the story that began with a desperate woman, a foreclosed ranch, and a mountain man with a generous heart. It was, they both knew, a love story for the ages. The kind that would be told around dinner tables and campfires for generations to come. The story of how Gabriel Stone walked down from his mountains and saved Susanna Barrett, and how in doing so, she saved him right back. And as they sat there together, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, they knew that whatever time they had left, whether it was days or years, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else, together, the way it was always meant to be, the way love was supposed to work, forever.